we should get started. So the first item is the new GraphQL architecture. We are refactoring the GraphQL architecture, and Abhishek, would you like to talk about it?
Sure. So basically, this is more of a discussion agenda item, which is we are working towards uh, a little bit of restructuring around GraphQL that is out there in Meshery server. So we are kind of drafting a design, and we put a lot of considerations over this. Let me just share my screen to show you guys around. Cool. So I have my screen is visible. All right. So basically, here's a small diagram that depicts the current architecture or the current model that has been running, and the proposed model. And we've been having a couple of or a lot of considerations around, or a lot of questions answered for moving towards the proposed model. So basically, this is so I'll give you an overview of what exactly the proposal is. So currently the GraphQL as a handler is registered behind something called a provider, which is in Meshery server. And the main agenda is to basically move out the GraphQL in the provider dependency, and then make it an independent component in Meshery server. I know it's kind of hard to understand with very few words, but the diagram little bit explains how the flow is. Basically, when a request arrives in a handler instance, it goes through the middlewares that we have in Meshery in the current model. Basically, authentication, authorization, and validation for your provider, everything happens. And then the request arrives at your REST handlers, basically whichever route you had requested for in case of REST request. And in case of GraphQL, it goes through one particular endpoint where the GraphQL endpoint is registered, which is /API/system/GraphQL. These can be the endpoint information can be found in this particular sheet where we track it. This explains which endpoint is going to where. So so basically, right now, resolvers are registered behind something called a provider. Provider is nothing but an instance inside Meshery which tracks which provider you are authenticated as, and it has those capabilities. It has those capabilities of your particular provider. And GraphQL right now, the main agenda of moving it out of provider, or why we propose it, is because currently we won't be able to switch between provider or different providers capabilities because it's behind a provider. So moving it forward would help us have multiple behaviors based on the provider is authenticated. So yeah, so this is basically the gist of what the proposal is, and we would like for anybody who is interested to, or anyone's opinion is much needed in here.
Another way of saying what the impetus for this rewrite, this re-architecture, or this update to the architecture is that when GraphQL has been brought in by the remote provider, the Meshery remote provider, for purposes of primarily for purposes of mesh map and providing a visual topology with real-time kind of updates, real-time a subscription, real-time WebSocket updates. And you know, and then the collection of maintainers and contributors that have been working on that and working on Meshery itself are rethinking that, like, hey, maybe this is much more broadly useful as we go to try to make Meshery's UI pervasively responsive, like pervasively real time, that, you know, any statistic and any metric or any of the UIs that you're looking at, that like the user experience and the user expectation would be that data is fresh. Like if you have a performance test result available to you, the total count that you're looking at is in fact fresh. You don't have to refresh the screen. You don't have to navigate away and come back. You don't have to. It becomes much more of a single page application feeling, a web app feeling. So anyway, just to.
Okay. So basically we are posting out all the questions that we have before we move on to a solid proposal. And we are just answering them over to sort of ensure that we are moving in the right path. And so the questions are available in one of these docs, and I think this needs to be moved out to a new place. Is this shareable, Lee?
No, it just needs to be, I think we need to copy and paste that into a doc inside of the, so it sounds like before the end of the call, you'll have a link in the meeting minutes. Yeah, just a different doc in Community Drive. So yeah, actually to my point, so this particular document is it's just a design spec on MeshMap, the visual topology. And GraphQL came about, or the use of GraphQL came about via the provider and gets dynamically kind of loaded in that way. And then, but through these discussions, it became evident that we want to make, like I said, Meshery UI much more, responsive is the wrong word, but just real time, much more of a web app, a full web app feeling. And that's why the notes are in this doc, but these are generic notes about how GraphQL should work in Meshery. So they just need to be moved out of this doc. Yep. Good. So maybe a couple of questions for me just to help others digest and ask some other questions. So there's a couple of things to sort of take away. Actually, the color coding always gets me confused because it's the same colors used between the two, but the current model is the one on the bottom. Okay, good. There's a couple of things that are listed even in the current model that are aspirational. So Abhishek, like the authorization box in the current model is like, well, that's on roadmap, that's planned. And that's fine. I'm probably getting too specific. But what's, I think, more important in what you're trying to convey here is the flow and the lot, and at what point in the flow is particular logic evaluated or enforced. And so if we look at the proposed model, it looks like there are two paths, two initial paths from the HTTP handler instance. I think the mental model that everyone should be using as you grok this and consider what's going on here is the HTTP handler instance is more or less the URL, the endpoint, like localhost :9081, like wherever your Meshery is deployed, your Meshery server, like /API/ something, like it could be like /management /istio, like if that was if that's the API that you're calling. And so the green box are these various API endpoints, these URLs. So request users, Meshery UI is the most prominent train of thought that I think that we all have as we look at this. And certainly in context of GraphQL, it's like, yeah, well, what are we trying to use GraphQL for? Well, from Meshery UI, like that's the core use case. The thing is like if you consider Meshery UI in an abstract way, Meshery UI is just a client, just like our other popular client, Meshery CTL. Meshery CTL, though, it only uses the REST API today and probably for the foreseeable future. Like that, I don't think that there's a different plan currently. Okay, good. So, but this is, while the changes that we're alluding to are primarily with respect to, or they are entirely with respect to GraphQL, right? So Meshery CTL as a client of Meshery server's APIs, no change there, no effect to the flow by which those those requests are evaluated. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Okay, so this is only for GraphQL, and currently the only client that this community stewards that it uses GraphQL is Meshery UI. Now, I say it like that because I understand that there are others that have begun to use the Meshery REST API, but I don't think that there are external entities, external users or integrators that have started to use the GraphQL APIs. So currently it's really sort of a project internal consideration, if you will. Is that how you're continuing to think of the use of GraphQL, or are you considering that external users, external integrators of the project that this is a project external facing API? Is that?
No, it's internal facing.
So it's internal facing, or that's the design?
It's not. Yeah.
Okay. So as you, okay. So I think to characterize that more accurately, like technically it's external facing to the extent that like technically the port is open, just like the port for the REST API is open, that so long as someone is authenticated and authorized, they could get to the GraphQL API. But the mental model for how you're designing it is that really you're only considering internal consumption now?
No. So if they are authenticated and authorized by the provider, then they will be able to construct over GraphQL.
Okay. So then we should consider we should make considerations for external clients. Okay.
You mean unauthenticated?
No, authenticated, no, external, I mean like a component other than Meshery UI and other than Meshery CTL. Some other client that this community doesn't necessarily write, that like a different entity, a different user, a different organization, they write. So we should hold that in our minds as we evaluate this, right? Okay. So GraphQL, as the proposal here, is that the GraphQL resolvers or the GraphQL APIs are, well, they are not first class, or they are second class. They are second to the REST handlers, that all requests to GraphQL resolvers must first flow through the REST handlers. And the reason for that is?
Yeah. Because GraphQL is registered as a HTTP handler.
Okay. Whereas GraphQL, that's not feasible. It's a different.
No, it is by design that way. As in, it is always registered to a HTTP handler, and because GraphQL works under the hood, it's just a post request. So, for example, if you do a query, it's just a post request. So it works over HTTP.
Okay, so that means it has to go through REST?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to think about that.
Just the queries and mutations, but in case of subscriptions, they are direct. Like they are WebSockets, so they don't operate over REST.
Okay, I don't see that flow here.
Okay, so we'll need to add browser in here again. Browser as a separate component. But this is just a request response flow.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think, the ask, by the way, was like 3 or 4 different flows, right? Like subscription, mutation, and gets. And so, yeah, if they're all in the same diagram, great. If it's different diagrams, great. But it sounds like it's an incomplete proposal. Also, I don't know, the way that you're describing GraphQL, I don't know that I would hear many others describe it as, like, the way that GraphQL works is that it sits behind REST. Because it's HTTP and you're posting to it, it must go through REST. It's like, well, is that what you're saying? Or
yeah.
Okay. Who else has comments and feedback and questions?
So like the question about REST was basically the GraphQL is different from REST in that way that it bundles up all the queries you want for at one particular endpoint, so, and then makes a post or whatever to the REST endpoint and get the results. That was where we were confused, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't get it. I don't buy that. Like, you have to be able to get to GraphQL, you have to go through REST. And we have to invoke the REST logic. And that, I guess there's some way that you're going to identify that you don't involve the REST session injector, that you're going to wait and involve the session injector for GraphQL. That if the request, like the GET request is coming over, do GET requests flow over the WebSocket connection for GraphQL? Like a GraphQL?
No. Get request, you mean a query, right?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay. We also don't have the WebSocket listed here, which I guess is the subscription. All right, so I guess that's the same thing.
Yeah, so I'll have another browser component probably for WebSockets.
So the stack trace for invoking a GraphQL query must go through our REST. It must go through Gorilla.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Other comments to Abhishek? Yes. Nobody has any more comments on this. So thank you, Abhishek. Let's move on to the next item. We have Soham to do a recap on filter configuration and capabilities. Soham, do you want to share your screen?
I don't think sharing screen would be necessary. I don't have any docs that I have prepared. So a basic recap regarding the filter configuration and capabilities is that the Wasm team and I had a meeting recently, and we discussed a few stuff about filters and how we are going to configure them. So a few stuff that we discussed was that how everything works behind the hood, how Image Hub takes in uses the rate limiter, how does the JSON descriptor looks like, or for now actually we don't have an exact JSON descriptor. We just have a dummy JSON that the project uses to like showcase the functionality. The team has yet to create or implement the functionality to receive application or filter name or service name, etc., and return back specific configuration. So I guess they need a week or some time to work on that. That's it, I guess. That was the.
Yeah. So question, do you have a JSON document that, or something that describes the things that are configurable for a filter?
Yes, exactly. Yes. So I mentioned that there was a dummy JSON that was being used, which mentioned the endpoint, the rules. For example, there is only one rule for right now, that is the rate limiter. Then the parameters that you can pass. Guys, am I audible? Like, I feel
Yes,
that
yes, you are.
Yes, audible.
Oh God, yeah, because everybody just froze, so I thought that I was not audible. So yeah, the JSON has a few values that we can look as configurable values. For example, the parameters, the rule type, etc. Yeah, wait, I have it saved on Notion. I just maybe just
Yeah,
pop it.
Soham, I have shared the link of that.
Cool. It's gonna get finished.
Is it the same now?
Maybe let me just check it and I'll share my screen.
Sure.
Just a second. Yeah, so this is the JSON descriptor, if you can see. This is how the JSON exactly looks like.
Cool. So this is the JSON for this specific filter. Great. And this is becoming more and more of a powerful filter. Like in essence, the filter that we're looking at here is a filter focused on rate limiting, but more powerful, I would consider, than your regular rate limiter, in that it considers application level content, like of the requests. And so nice. And it does so on a per path basis as well.
Yeah, it does it on it. You can pass the path and then set the rules for that path.
Okay, good. Good. As you look at this, what does a generic JSON document look like? Maybe, I guess that question maybe is sort of aimed, well, it's aimed at Rudraksh.
I guess Rudraksh is on the call.
And
Yep. So
Rudraksh is on the call.
I had some. I'll share the link to ImageUp spec. I have documented some of the JSON there. You got this one. So yeah, just a very rough details about the configuration, like how does the JSON work? I mean, how does the filter read it and interpret it to apply rate limiting? The name thing is for endpoints, and rule type is specifying a filter. We can have other filters as well. So this will be where filter will be specified. and parameters are kind of different identifiers to differentiate users based on their limit. I mean, the limit which they would be facing. So, yeah, this is the basic description about the JSON. And you can have this for your app. Like, if you have some other app, for example, we use Bookinfo, Istio Bookinfo application, and there is an endpoint, product page endpoint. So that endpoint we can put in the name field, and it will just listen for the rate limit. I mean, apply rate limit on that. So basically, this is what the filter does right now. Pranav, I, Gaurav, Navendu, we all are working on making this all generic. Like Meshery will be able to apply a filter, like all the stuff that people might need to do right now using kubectl and all. They'll just need to do it using Meshery. They'll upload a filter and a WASM file, a WASM binary would be present as well. So it will just read the binary, will be provided to the WASM VM in proxies, and the configuration will be sent to the proxy. I mean the service mesh, and the service mesh will send it to proxy. Like that's all that happens in the background. Yeah, so anyways, we are just focused on doing this, killing all the manual stuff, making this possible in a very easy way using UI. Yep, that's
Yep, very good. Thanks for this. Utkarsh, do we have a sample pattern-based filter configuration, like a trait metadata for filters?
No, not yet. But I think I think the JSON that Refactoring is sharing probably it can. We don't have a construct for that right now, but it can probably look the same as Refactoring sharing even right now. So
okay.
Yeah.
So we might need to talk about that, right? Yep.
It would be good if you guys do, because this particular filter is oriented toward the use case of rate limiting, which is fantastic and is great. There are other filters that will be oriented toward like transcribing HTTP to NATs, as an example, or filtering SQL queries and making sure that they are secure. They don't have they don't have SQL injection
Yep.
vulnerabilities. So like the use cases are fairly different, which means, the particular parameters, like the key value pairs, the specific key value pairs like identifier and rate limit, that we're seeing here are going to vary. The concept of a generic key value pair is probably somewhat ubiquitous. Like there's the configuration item and it has a value or has a setting. And then there's a configuration, and there's a configuration item that is an array of arrays, or it's a map. And so I don't know if, but Karshoff, just is your gut feeling that we could arrive at one, and I was probably using trait inappropriately, but just a single OM object that is generic enough that we would use for potentially all these different kinds of filters? Or
so it may get filter specific. I'm saying so because right now I'm unfamiliar if if these configurations actually change, I am assuming right now that these configurations get changed, does change based on the filter that, so if it's rate limiting, I think it has these name auth and name sign up because it's a rate limiting thing. It's rate limiting based on the route. So I think that this is because this would get specific to the filter. So probably the pattern would also get a bit specific to the, that can actually, so that will, so in theory, we can actually have a just generic trait or a workload, probably a trait, as you were actually rightly saying. And it could be probably a trait that can be applied to something which is generic, but then it will, basically I'm trying to say that it will get specific. It could be in the pattern, or it could be in the backend implementation. It will somewhere get specific.
Yep. So basically, this configuration field, like we have chosen this JSON, and this is how the filter works. Like anybody who implements a filter, they can use their own way to read this configuration. So this can be anything, and the filters can do different things. It's just like some sort of user input to the filter. So yeah, it can be very dynamic. I'd say it depends on the filter what this configuration looks like.
Cool. Yeah, very good. Yeah, I suspect it'll take us going through a couple to see what aspects we can potentially make generic. And I suspect it's, it's somewhere around in Ohm spec terms that the workload itself probably has a number of generic items about the name of the filter, where it's located, what version it's at, just how big the binary is, and various, items around that. And then some of the traits or the specific configurations for that a given filter would receive. There might be some overlap or some things that we can make generic there, but also it will probably start to break down fairly quickly to some, to like specifically what type of filter is this, and what is it, how do you configure it specifically, is my guess, which is fine, which is just. So Samir, this is a perfect time to address one of the questions that you'd asked previously. And I don't know that we had that there was a strong response in Slack on it. And so this is, I don't know if you want to cover your use case now, Samir, or if you want to.
Yes. So our use case was kind of we are, as I told, we are using various microservices, and some of the microservices needs this particular way of validating the JWT token. Okay, so what exactly the JWT token does? So when it comes, it checks for two things. So one is the header, and which is from there it checks whether X sub is properly passed or not. So depending upon that, it rejects. So if it passes, then it fetch the username and the email ID from the body and append the same into the header and push it forward to the next service. So currently we are doing it through Azure API management, so which is not effective. So that is where we are trying to do some of the envoy filters thing, but that is also a bit complicated, not so straightforward. So yeah, that is something which we are aspiring to achieve. And there is much more kind of authorization and authentication we want to do depending upon the JWT token. And there are much more computation also we want to do. So remove a part of JWT and pass it forward to the next service. And also like, whatever we can do from the security perspective, so we should be able to do it from the service mesh, so that we should not need another microservice to do this alone. And all the TLS or any kind of authorization should terminate at ISTO level.
Yep. Uh, I think a filter can be made for this. I'm not sure, but yeah, like it would intercept all the traffic, so it just reads all your packets. So it should be able to do this.
Okay, then
I
that
can.
would be great. Like, we would like to have it, because I have struggled a lot with envoy filter at the moment. So
Yeah. So Samir, do you mind if I've got more questions for you, and I suspect it'll take a while to walk through. Like, it'd be nice to grab Rudraksh and some others and go through we'll get go through some of the specifics. Like, it sounds like initially some of what you're looking for is it's relatively straightforward. It's verification of the fact that it's a valid JWT. That subsequent to that, there are things about potentially removing some details from the JOT.
yes,
Potentially
from the header, and remove some of the part from the header, add back some of the elements from body to the header and pass it on, because our next microservice needs the email ID to send some of kind of emails, and we do not really conserve the user details. That is something which is the part of our design. So we do not collect any user data. So it should be on the fly.
Yeah, I love the use case. Yeah.
Yep.
So I have high confidence. Some of I have high confidence that a filter can do that thing, and that the one that we're discussing here is a great basis for for the filter, that the capabilities that you're discussing. In parallel to this is Meshery as a service mesh manager. Its capabilities in this regard are just emerging, and so this is what perfect timing to walk through this use case to make sure that what's being designed meets precisely what you're looking to do. Because
So
it's not.
to be more specific, what exactly it checks in the email? Only the domain name. So only the last part, so that it should not keep any user data in it.
Oh, I see. And is that what is to be removed from?
No. So if we get only the email ID, then we can just do some operation to discard or remove some of the information before @ and evaluate after @ whatever is there. Is that organization is part of our product? Then we do it.
Gotcha. Nice. So we'll catch up then. We'll go through this in a bit more detail.
Yes, sure.
Nice.
Thank you for listening, because this is something we are struggling from last few weeks.
Sounds painful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Well, we're here. Yeah. Let's do it. We're here to help. I'll message you after the call.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Yeah. So let's head on to the next item. Piyush has a demo on Meshery Purview. So Piyush, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So Meshery CTL perf commands are for running performance tests on your applications or on your service meshes. So it has recently been revamped to support two new subcommands, apply and view. Apply will let you run a performance test, and view will basically give you a configuration of your current performance profile. So
okay. So I have this performance profile here, and let's test out listing it first, like checking out the results in this. For view, and then the profile ID, and then the argument which you want to check. Let's say console. So this will list out all the results that have the thing in the main console in the main portion, and it will list out multiple. If we like to, if there are multiple results with the same name, like similar name, it will print out all those results. That was addition in Meshery CTL per view, like then the profile ID and then the argument we want to search. And the next thing that is like that have been added to Meshery CTL perf is apply command. That will work something like this. Let's say we are just only passing the profile ID here. So in that case, what will happen is it will try to fetch the performance profile, and then it will grab the URL from the profile itself, and then it will start the performance test. So it should be running right now.
So Piyush, does the user have to specify the ID?
Yeah, user have to specify the ID. After apply, the next argument will be ID. There are multiple cases I will be explaining it.
And they can't specify. They can't specify it by profile name.
Yeah, they can actually. Like results are currently 9, and if I refresh it, it will be 10. Like the result, the test was executed. And the second case is like passing the URL right here. Okay. So in this case, the URL will be set from the flag, and it will be like running the test with this profile ID.
So the URL flag that you provided here, it's overriding the URL that is
inside the profile. Yeah. Okay, so let's refresh it. 11 results. Okay. So the third case is when user does not want to provide this profile ID, and he just want to grab a profile name, like just to run with the profile name. Profile name. Okay. So what will happen in this case? It will create a profile first with the name new2, and then it will grab the profile ID from there, and then it will execute the test. So first it created the profile, then it set the test URL to the URL we passed, and then it started the execution of the test.
Is by and large like the output of those logs that are happening there?
Mm-hmm.
Is that coming from Meshery CTL, or is that coming from the endpoint?
These logs are verbose logs, and these are from Meshery CTL, and these are from the endpoints.
Okay, I heard the top log.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, your voice is just hard to hear. That you said the top logs are from Meshery CTL.
Yeah, these are from Meshery CTL.
Okay.
And if I refresh it, there is new view with the result here. So these are the three cases when a text can be executed. Other than that, there will be errors. Yeah. Any feedback?
Piyush, like instead of having to pass in a profile ID, like if the user has an existing profile, existing performance profile, can we use that profile name to run a test on that same profile?
Yeah, we cannot because the endpoints does not support that kind of facility. Endpoints only responds uniquely with the profile ID, as the names aren't unique. Like if someone pass a new, that will have that we can have multiple new profiles, and we don't know how to like work with that.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Should we predefine with Json?
Like this one,
Yeah.
it's not from my side; it's from the endpoints, the handlers thing.
No,
Yeah,
actually, you can. Yeah.
Yeah, Utkarsh, go ahead.
Yeah, basically, I was trying to say that you can, while converting to JSON, you can actually specify the indentation that you want, and it will actually format it nicely. It's present in Golang.
Piyush, did you get what Utkarsh and Dhruv mentioned?
I do understand what Drew was asking from into me. I will talk to Utkarsh. Like I didn't get exactly what he's trying to say. I'll talk to him once.
Okay. Basically, to prettify this JSON response so that it is more readable to a user of the CLI. So it can be done while we get the JSON response. So I think it's while we unmarshal it, we can specify the indentation so that the output will be formatted nicely. So yeah.
Cool. I'll look into it.
Okay. Any other comments to Piyush?
Yeah. Did we move away from the when? So last time we looked at this, there was a list. People would list out their performance tests, profiles.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Has that changed or like?
No, that doesn't change.
Okay.
Should I demo it?
If you would, yeah, just really briefly.
This works like this. There are only two profiles, so it is only listing them. And if I press like Control C or spacebar, this will close.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Piyush. And Piyush has also been working on adding unit tests to Meshery CTL. And there are a couple of maintainers and seasoned contributors here. So he has started to write some unit tests. So it would be great if we get some feedback. And I have shared the PR on the chat. Awesome. So we are on to Dhruv. Do you want to talk about Grafana and Prometheus architecture?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about the charts which you see in Meshery. Half of you might have seen those, half of you might have never come across those. So this was just a brief to get into how it works, and there are a lot of bugs in there which we needed to fix. So we needed to get a better view of the architecture of how the graph worked and so forth and so forth. So this particular effort was just to get to know how the architecture was working a bit properly, because there were a few things in the documentation that were missing. So we're trying to pull that end off, and then the next step would be to fix the bugs which we have currently. And yeah, so right now I'm gonna talk about how the architecture works and few stuff about. So as you know, when you go to settings, there's something called as matrices associated, where you have two options: uh, whether you can look into the Grafana boards which you have in your Grafana instance, or you can create a Prometheus instance. Now, this kind of boards are what is called as, what in Meshery we call as dynamic boards. These are the boards which you can either create in case of Prometheus, or you can import it from your Grafana instance itself. So they are like defined by you yourself. And there are second kind of boards which are called as static boards in Meshery. You won't see it around per se, but when you go to preferences, right? And you say that you want to send your performance results to Meshery itself. We have some static boards which we have defined ourselves, which query some Prometheus stats which we might use. So those are basically the two kinds of boards which you have in Meshery. So let's talk in deep how those things works and what is happening in the backend, right? Because it's a bit confusing. So, okay, yeah. So let's start with Grafana charts. So as you can see, first of all, you need to connect with your Grafana instance in Meshery for it to work. Like this is the first step which you have. So, okay, wait. Let me just be over here. I don't want to move that. So yeah. So first of all, you depending on the configuration of the Grafana you have, whether it needs a API key for the viewer for some external party to view your graph or not, you give uh, give input of your Grafana URL and the API key if needed. FYI, Meshery automatically detects your Grafana URL, as you must have saw before, and then it tries to see whether it is able to communicate with Grafana or not. To do that, it does a simple get request to the slash API slash org endpoint in your Grafana instance, and checks whether it gets a proper answer or not. If it doesn't, then your API configuration or your URL is wrong. Otherwise, you're good to go. Now, second thing it does is it queries all the boards which you have from Grafana. For that, it uses the Grafana SDK, which is present for Golang itself. You can find it in the GitHub repo, and it searches for the Grafana boards which are present and saves it in Meshy server, and then gives it back to the UI itself. Uh, and yeah, for the query, it does not use the SDK per se, but it queries the endpoint which you had for Grafana URL with all the query rates depending on the board which you have chosen. And hence we get the board results which you just saw before. Uh, so let's, okay, till this loads, I will go back and add few more things. Now let's look into Prometheus. Here's where things get a bit confusing, I guess, for the people who don't use it. So for Prometheus, first of all, you connect it in a simple way as we do for Grafana, where it will basically check whether your URL is correct or not, and it will ping slash API v1 status and config of your Prometheus. And yeah, that's the easy part. Now the weird part, not the weird part, this is intentional, but if you want to set a dynamic Grafana chart for you to use, what it will do is it will take raw JSON input for a Grafana instance which queries a Prometheus chart. This is how we load a board for Prometheus instance itself. So for this to work, what it will basically do is it will in the JSON settings of in the JSON schema of your Grafana chart, you will put Prometheus as one of the data entries while doing that. So in that case, it will create a Grafana chart, and that your Grafana instance will query the Prometheus instance. Let's say that's like in most of the cases, Prometheus is one of the data source of Grafana itself. So it will basically use this particular data source to query the Grafana matrix which you want to see. So that's how this works. But in case of the static graph, which Meshery collects when you are having a performance test, it does not uh, communicate with Grafana as a middleman to get your Prometheus chart itself. It basically queries it directly from Prometheus itself, and if user has allowed to save the chart data to Meshery cloud, then it will save it to the cloud or else. So yeah, that's the brief of how it works. I think most of you would have a lot of questions since yeah, it's a bit to take on, I guess. And I'm up for query. And if you guys are not, I would. Yeah, handouts.
Drew, do we have a list of metrics collected for static boards, for static graphs?
Yeah, we do. So okay, there was a previous documentation on this. I have also added it in this particular talk itself. You can check it out in either one of those. So basically, there are two particular kind of static data which we collect when someone does a performance test, right? One is the cluster-wide matrix, and second is a node-wide matrix. So if you want to see in detail, you can check it out what particular things we query and save if the user has allowed. And yeah, that's it. And one more important thing to note, I guess, for someone who might be interested or want to know how it works, per node matrix, you need to have information for each node itself. So there are two ways to do it. One is to directly get it from Kubernetes, or second is to use the Prometheus instance to get the nodes which you have in your cluster. So currently in Meshery, we are using Prometheus to uh, get the nodes which are there in your cluster and then query the matrices for each of those.
Okay. Is there a requirement that that the Prometheus deployment be have a node exporter loaded, or that it be of an operator, or like it be an operator deployment, that there's any particular requirement?
So like if you don't have a particular graph over here, it will still, like, you mean to say you have a saved graph from this suburb. So that's what you're asking?
Yeah, or if there's any requirements on your Prometheus deployment necessary to collect cluster-wide or node-specific metrics?
I actually don't know the specific configuration that Prometheus needs for this to get the data for particular nodes and all, because to be honest, they were always set up when I load this particular thing from Meshery. I won't be able to answer that.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, there under the per node metrics, actually part of it is saying we collect from Prometheus node exporter. So okay, that in part helps answer the question. One thing that would be, I think, enlightening for you and for the rest of us is if you have if you're able to retrieve the PromQL or the query that's used for each of these, assuming that there's one query for each, that would be enlightening. That would be nice to have called out.
Okay, so yeah, that can be done. I would have a template of what kind of query it uses for each of these particular things. Yeah, that okay. Noted, will be done.
Okay.
Thanks for the feedback.
Other feedbacks to Dhruv? Thank you, Dhruv. And I guess we are out of time today. We have missed a couple of items. Oh, Lee, go ahead.
Oh, nope. Nothing.
Okay. So about the missing items, Utkarsh has design spec open for integrating pattern files and meshing data. And if you like to go through that and give a review or yeah, and you can do that. And I have shared the link to the doc in the chat. And we also have a discussion going on to change the the one-liner bash script installation. So I know some of you have worked on the bash script and Meshery CTL before, so it would be great if I can get your suggestions on that. With that, let's come to a close for this meeting. Thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you guys Friday on the community call. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, people. Bye, Navindu.